This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back, folks. Joining me now, Jeffrey Clarke, who served in the Trump administration as Assistant Attorney General, a fine lawyer whose opinion on the Electoral College Act and other issues regarding the 2020 election are quite different than some, I'd say, talking heads over there at MSNBC. Jeff Clarke has borne the brunt of a vicious personal attack on him, not because he had a different legal opinion, but because he's an extraordinarily effective and honest lawyer, and they don't want him in the next Trump administration. That's my opinion. We're delighted to have Jeff Clarke with us today because there are so many legal issues here that I want to hear his opinion on. Jeff Clarke, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Well, thanks, Roger. Always good to be here with clearly, you know, as your bumper indicated, preeminent political mind of this century and the last one.
Well, you're very kind. Let's get right into it. Special Counsel Jack Smith had always sought to bring Donald Trump to trial prior to this election. Why they would prosecute Trump in both state and federal cases in the last year of Joe Biden's presidency rather than the first year, well, I think that's because they didn't believe Trump could get renominated, that he would be defeated by Governor Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or some other establishment candidate, and therefore the danger of Donald Trump the disruptor, Donald Trump who will always put America first, Donald Trump who's not committed to the concept of endless foreign war and printing press money, Donald Trump, who is committed to sealing our southern border against the influx of crime and drugs and sex and child sex trafficking. They thought he was done, but he wasn't done. In fact, he rolled up the Republican nomination with extraordinary ease. I think that shows you how much the Republican Party has changed at the grassroots to be a populist America First party. But they therefore put together this strategy in both state and federal courts to bring him to trial on largely fabricated charges. That got interrupted by Trump's assertion of his immunity rights as a former president. He had proper due process in the district and Supreme Courts, and an immunity ruling, which we're still trying to parse because it's complicated, prevented a trial of Trump before the election, which, of course, was their goal. Now, Special Counsel Jack Smith has filed what is essentially his case against Trump, or an semblance of it, but has a lot of redactions, a lot of question marks about it. It's a very one-sided, biased document. And then Judge Chutkan, the D.C. judge presiding over this matter there, elected to release it. Jeff, tell us what you think of this.
Sure. I mean, well, it's truly remarkable. Look, it's an unconstitutional document, which I'll unpack. It's a document that violates the rules of criminal procedure, the federal rules of criminal procedure, and it clearly is just designed to interfere in the election, or as I've been saying, it's not just to poison the jury pool, it's to poison the electoral pool for President Trump. And there's no other way to see it because there's never been a document like this before. ordinarily what happens, just so the audience understands, and this is, true of both criminal litigation and civil litigation, is that there's some opening pleading. So for a criminal case, it's either an indictment or it's something called an information. Here we're talking about an indictment. And then the indictment gets filed, and then the defendant gets to defend themselves by moving to dismiss if they have grounds for that. And President Trump clearly has grounds for that here. But, oh, no, that system was not followed by Jack Smith and Judge Chutkan, who just rubber-stamped what Jack Smith wanted to do. They cooked up this, plan in the bowels of the deep state parts of the Justice Department, and they decided that no, we can move first twice. After they got the remand back from the immunity decision, Trump v. U.S. that you mentioned on that decision was July 1st. The remand came back a little bit later. They decided to take a long delay and then issue a superseding indictment. So they were secretly meeting with a grand jury, and there was no leaking of that, which is itself remarkable because, Roger, as you know, during the days when witnesses were going in and out of the grand jury for Trump the first time, the media was staked out there. They would see everybody who came and went. It was all like a social scene almost. And but magically this indictment came out. No one seemed to notice. It was a surprise. And after that indictment came out, President Trump should have gotten the chance to file a motion to dismiss, but he wasn't allowed to do that. He was told, no, Jack Smith is going to file this unprecedented up to 180-page document. It turned out to be 165 pages, attacking you all unilaterally. This is evidence that, with secret grand jury testimony derived from FBI interviews, maybe from some wiretaps, maybe from different kinds of warrants. It's all amalgamated into one. It's all Jack Smith's view of what he thinks the facts are, but there's no testing of that by cross-examination. There's no attempts to argue that, ability for President Trump to argue at this time that this evidence can't possibly be admitted and should be excluded, or if it was developed through warrants that it should be suppressed. None of that. In other words, President Trump's constitutional due process rights, his Fourth Amendment rights to not be, not have others subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures, and his Sixth Amendment Confrontation Clause rights have all been violated by this process, the likes of which has never been seen before. And it's all been jury-rigged, jury-built just for President Trump and just to get this 165-page document out in October as Jack Smith's October surprise. It's really jaw-dropping. And, I could go on and on. We could talk about how this violates Justice Department policy. We could talk about the fact that this is, as I said, historically unprecedented because you let defendants decide how they're going to proceed if you see a new superseding indictment. And let me pause there, Roger, and see, what your reaction to that is and your follow-up questions, and I can unpack it more.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a late hit. It's an 11th hour attempt to try to affect the election, which is what these cases have been about from the very beginning. When we come back, I want to pick this back up, but at the same time, I also want to get your opinion on this stunning announcement late last week that the Department of Justice now wants to postpone the trial of Ryan Routh, the man charged with attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, because there is so much more information, more evidence that has come to their attention. So Judge Cannon had set that trial for about a month from now, but that trial can now not take place before the election, and we have no idea what this new evidence is about. So in the case of Trump, the prosecutors get to lay out their case, but in the case of Routh, we're kept in the dark. When we come back, I'm going to ask Jeff Clarke about exactly that, so don't go away.
Now, it's time for Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group. Here's Roger Stone.
In these uncertain and turbulent economic times, and with the U.S. government under the current administration hurtling towards a digital currency where you wouldn't even control your own money, with spending of printing press money completely out of control, now is the time to protect your retirement nest egg with precious metals like gold and silver. And the company I trust to do that is Colonial Metals. Colonial Metals are the experts. They could even help you convert your IRA, so some portion or all of it can be invested in the solid investment of precious metals like gold and silver. So go to colonialmetals.com/stone or call 800-747-6598 for a free consultation and find out whether you're eligible to get $7,500 of free silver today.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump.
They went after a guy named Roger Stone, who's sitting in the office. And I'll say this in front of Roger, he's no baby. And right now, he's cleaner than anybody in this place. No, they treated him very unfairly.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone.
Roger Stone.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group. Now, here's Roger Stone.
And we're back with Jeff Clarke, who served a long and distinguished career in both public and private law, serving in the earlier as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Bush administration, and now then subsequently serving as Assistant Attorney General under President Donald Trump. If you watched that debate the other night between J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz, it was interesting when there was a brief discussion of the events of January 6th, and it was capped by the moderator saying that that alternative electors have been found to be both unconstitutional and illegal. I assume she means under the Electoral College Act. Jeff, I don't think that's correct, is it?
No, that's not correct, Roger. That's been part of their narrative that they've tried to build, but there were alternate electors that were presented in the 1960 election involving Kennedy and Nixon, and you even had President Nixon, not president at the time, but vice president, to his credit, presiding over the joint session of Congress on January 6th of the relevant year, and saying, these electors are going to go for President Kennedy after they were changed in Hawaii. And so the idea that there cannot be alternate electors is completely wrong. What you have is that there was testimony by all of the witnesses that the Democrats and the supposed Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger lined up for the January 6th committee that alternate electors were illegal, but that's just their view of it. This issue has not been litigated, and indeed it is underway in litigation, especially in Fani Willis's Georgia case. And, I know that the alternate electors down there, they're fighting tooth and nail. And I've recently seen a motion that was filed because John Eastman did not take an appeal, unlike me and unlike President Trump, up to the Georgia Court of Appeals to try to get Fani Willis disqualified. But, John's new motion also, weighs in an issue in this fight about the alternate electors. So, stay tuned. The way that Norah O'Donnell portrayed that at the debate, which Vance completely dominated and schooled Walz at as if this were, a settled legal question, and it was obvious that what was done in 2020 on the Republican side was unconstitutional. It's just bunk.
Yeah, this whole fake elector narrative, which is constantly spouted by the Democrats, and you hear constantly at MSNBC. If you look at the election of 1877, if you look at the dispute in Hawaii, where John F. Kennedy filed an alternative slate of electors, on election night, it appeared that Vice President Nixon had won, and that his electors would be seated. But after the absentee ballots had been counted, those electoral college votes filed in the alternative slate by JFK went to Kennedy. It is also interesting, if you just read the minutes of the meeting of the alternative electors in Georgia, is they very clearly say, we, in view of the fact that there will be pending litigation, which could ultimately end with the seating of our alternative elector slate, we're forming this slate of alternative electors to preserve our legal rights. Now, clearly, if they lost such litigation, alternative electors would not have been seated. Even now, we see growing evidence of extraordinary voter fraud in Georgia unfolding in both the state and federal courts. So having the talking heads in this debate last week pretend that there's no dispute about irregularities, anomalies, or in many cases outright fraud in the 2020 election is simply not true. Your opinion, Jeff, of the decision announced by the DOJ that Ryan Routh, the man accused of being the assassination of would-be assassin of President Donald Trump, that his trial will be postponed indefinitely. What's your take on that?
Well, look, if they wanted to get this guy right, like they've done with all the January 6th defendants in, record speed, they definitely could. So the fact that they're slow walking this tells you that there's something else going on. And to me, let's do it in the most favorable light to them and then in the least favorable light to them. It seems to me either, they're just worried about exposure of Secret Service incompetence. And, the Biden administration has been a disaster on the competence front all across the board. They're just a disaster. And so, that's the last thing they want to highlight before the election in some way, or even just after it in the transition period if President Trump, God willing, is reelected, that, they have a huge incompetence pool. And, or it's more nefarious than that, right? I mean, why is it that there's this vehicle for Ralph that's like parked alongside of the golf course for so many hours, and he's just like entered through and he's hiding there and no one spots him? I mean, they don't have drones. They don't have, some kind of motion sensors. They don't have some kind of infrared technology. They're not doing regular sweeps. I mean, it's the same kinds of questions that come up about, the shooter up in Butler, Pennsylvania. That one they can dodge more easily because, he was killed. But, look, the Secret Service at this point seems to be a disaster. And I think, at the very least, they want to keep a lid on it so people won't say, hey, if the Biden administration had competence problems, wait till you see what kind of competence level you get from Kamala Harris.
So let's talk about your own personal situation. You have also been a target of lawfare, not because you did anything wrong, but because I think those in the Democrat Party and their allies in the left-wing media see you as effectively, as extraordinarily effective. I know you to be a man of extraordinary integrity and honesty, and you have a different legal opinion than others, which today they'd somehow like to make grounds for your being disbarred. Tell us about that fight and how folks can help.
Well, thanks, Roger. So I face two challenges. One is from the D.C. bar, and the other one is from Fani Willis. On the Fani Willis front, the appeal that I mentioned of whether Fani Willis will be disqualified from that case or not due to conflicts of interest and due to her violating various ethics disclosure laws in Georgia, that's going to be argued on December 5th down south. And then on the bar, there's briefing that's going to be, getting underway that's going to be pretty intense and lengthy briefing. And that's going to result in an oral argument before this body in D.C. called the Board on Professional Responsibility. That's set for December 19th. Meanwhile, I am trying to take both of those cases into federal court, and I still have pending appeals in both the 11th Circuit of removing the Fani Willis case, and I also have removed the Barr case, and that case has reached the Supreme Court stage. Actually, I just got an extension to file my petition for cert. So there's a whole lot of litigation, and I'd appreciate any help at www.givesendgo.com/Jeff Clarke, JEFFCLARK.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. My guest, Jeff Clarke, who served with distinction as Assistant Attorney General of the United States under President Donald Trump. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve. It's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.